Welcome to Supply Chain Now, the voice of global supply chain. Supply Chain Now focuses on the best in the business for our worldwide audience, the people, the technologies, the best practices, and today's critical issues, the challenges and opportunities. Stay tuned to hear from those making global business happen right here on Supply Chain Now.
Hey, good morning. Scott Luton and Jenny Froome with you here at Supply Chain Now. Welcome to today's show. Jenny, on today's show, we're continuing our supply chain leadership across Africa and beyond with this episode here today, of course, in conjunction with our dear friends at SAPIX. Jenny Froome serves as COO of SAPIX, doing wonderful work from a professional development, a networking, a connectivity, and a lot more standpoint with the team over at SAPIX. You can check them out at sapix.org. Jenny, good morning. How you doing?
Good morning, good afternoon. Doing well. The sun is shining and it's a great day.
Wonderful. You know, maybe I haven't noticed it, but the zebra painting behind you, is that a new one or have I been blind in previous interviews?
You've been blind in previous interviews.
Okay.
No, it's been there for a while actually, since we did the ASCA conference last year. We put up something to reflect the fact that I'm sitting in South Africa and not in England or otherwise.
I love it. We'll have to talk more. In fact, I've learned from our dear mutual friend, Laura Cesari, that zebras do indeed change their stripes, contrary to many assumptions, but we'll save that for a later episode. Hey, quick programming note, folks. You're going to love today's conversation with a wonderful guest, but you don't want to miss these. So make sure you find Supply Chain Now wherever you get your podcast from. Click subscribe so you don't miss a single thing. Okay, let's dive into, Jenny, this wonderful guest we've got here today. I'm going to share a couple of things about his journey, and then we're going to bring him right on in. We try to keep the cat in the bag, so to speak. Our guest today is an award-winning and serial entrepreneur. He was named to Time Magazine's Innovations list for 2019. He received the MIT Innovate for Refugees Award, the Young Global Leader Award from the World Economic Forum, and many, many others. I had it was like the yellow pages of accomplishments and awards. I had to cherry pick a bit, Jenny. Our guest's current venture was named one of the top innovations for circular economy by the World Economic Forum and Accenture. So with no further ado, I want to welcome in Ashish Gadnis, co-founder and CEO of BanQu. Ashish, how you doing?
Good morning. Thank you. I'm doing good. Thank you to both of you for this incredible opportunity. Feel very blessed. Thank you.
Well, Jenny, sometimes our pre-show conversations last, and as long as the interview, and we could have easily, I feel, spent that time because Ashish he's got this radiance,
energy.
Yes, this energy. And, we all love to be in person these days, and we'll talk about that momentarily, but it comes right on through the platform here, doesn't it?
Yeah. Even in still photos on LinkedIn, in the interviews that you do, you don't have to say a word. There's just a positivity that kind of emanates from you. So thank you for sharing that with us.
And that's important. We need that in truckloads here these days. But Ashish, before we get into what you're up to now and some of the ways you are changing the world and getting out and seeing the world, frankly, let's talk about your background. So tell us about yourself. Let's start with that universal question. Hey, where'd you grow up?
So I grew up in Mumbai, India, a long time ago. I'm old, as you can tell. And I grew up poor in India, but I'm not poor anymore. So feel very fortunate to be here.
So so Jenny and I, we love food, and we tout that a couple different ways, but we got to talk about the food growing up in Mumbai. What stands out really in your mind as a kid?
Oh, we didn't have much. So I think the thing that always jumped out to me was, once every 3 to 4 months, my mom and dad would have a little bit of money and I could buy the icy that was sold on the streets. It's probably the most unhygienic thing to eat, but I ate it once, one popsicle equivalent every 3 months or so. And it was heaven, man. It was absolutely heaven. I got sick afterwards, obviously, but it was worth it.
Hey, we can relate. And Jenny, I'm not sure what conjures up in your mind, but as a kid, when I grew up, these Chili Willies They were in every freezer in the south east of the U.S., I think, and we'd fight over the flavors. Me and my siblings and my cousins, but that was a big part of our upbringing as well. Jenny, how about you?
I can remember growing up a couple of years growing up in the States, and I've got an overriding memory of popsicles that came on 2 sticks that you split in half, and we were always supposed to share them, but I never did. So I always had to have both sticks.
Like so creamsicles cool. Or something, and
something like that.
Yeah, I love that.
Long time ago, 60s.
Well, thank you for sharing, Ashish. And so one other question. So obviously the icy, whether it was a healthy snack or not, was a memory that stood out for you. And I can appreciate your very humble upbringings. I think many of us, that are listening, can relate to that as well. What else? What other experience really sticks out that became a tradition for you or your family as you were growing up in India?
Honestly, I don't know if it was a experience tradition-wise, but I hated being poor. It's just deeply in my heart where, I had to stand in the ration line to get, wheat, rice, and oil, and it just kind of stayed with me. But I realized later on in life, as I started doing the work I do today, I spent some time in the DRC in Congo, and my poverty in India was relatively different. So I look back and go, that was like, I was upper middle class compared to a kid in Beni, Congo, who does not even have a glass of clean water. So it's all relative. So that's a memory that kind of just stays with me forever.
That is one of the most powerful lessons learned in today's conversation. And it's interesting that you called that out, because that's what I was thinking about as I was comparing and contrasting my own earlier journey. That context is so important. What you think, and I try to instill that in my 3 kids. You got it really good, and it is all relevant, right? Our definition of going without here is going to be much different than other places around the world. And gosh, you got to appreciate what you have, for sure.
Absolutely.
All right. So Jenny, there's so many things I feel like we could talk with Ashish about. A lot of kindred spirits, I think, on this panel here. But where are we headed next?
You've, as you say, you're old. I think we're all up the wrong side of 30 anyway, let's put it that way. But you've obviously done a lot more in your life than BanQu. So what are a couple of key roles that have led you to where you were just when you wanted to start up BanQu?
Absolutely. The 2 key roles, one's a role and one's an incident. I kind of put them hand in hand, right? One role was, I grew up poor. So my dad said, you can code or you can beg. And I'm not, I'm Indian, so I make fun of Indians. So I started coding, right? And that's that. So that's going to help me tremendously in terms of understanding systems and, what I call data democracy, which is the work kind of what I do today. That's key. But the other piece that kind of stayed with me was the bankability or the lack of bankability. And is the easiest way to explain is when I came to the United States in 1994, came legally, if anybody's listening, you never know, right? Just say that up front. It's a different day and age. So came legally, but I had $240. And I think that's a critical component that it's all relative, as I said, right? At the end of the first month, my boss said, you need to open a bank account. And for me, it was like, 1994, I'm like, are you kidding, right? I was like, that's awesome, right? And he said, yeah, take your rent receipt, take your pay stub, take the light bill, and they'll let you open a bank account. This was in Boston in 1994. And I was able to open a bank account, which is kind of like, sounds so ordinary to, people around the world, at least in the first world. But for me, that was kind of this pivotal moment where somebody recognized my existence. Yet, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, 20 years later, I had the same incident happen to me, but there was somebody else on the other end of the conversation who was refused a bank account. And I think it's kind of that understanding of systems and not being able to be banked or banked those are the 2 things that have really shaped my thinking. I hope that helps.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it really does. I remember when we first came to South Africa, and I'm from England originally, and it was 1995. And I was absolutely amazed that women were not allowed to have bank accounts. And it's just something that, from a privileged upbringing, you just take for granted. And so, yeah, and that concept of somebody actually appreciating you for being there is really humbling. Yeah.
So, so we're going to talk about BanQu in just a second, but as Jenny referenced, and as I referenced in our introduction of you, BanQu is just your latest venture. It looks like there's been a lot of initiatives and ventures and projects and businesses that you've been part of. Has there been a common thread that really energizes you amongst the ventures that you do, jump into and lead and start and found, or what is it? What is it that attracts you, Ashish, to what you're involved in?
To be honest, I mean, everything that I, have done up until I started BanQu was anchored in one single thing, which is what I do today, which is, I had this crazy idea when I was 15 that I want to end extreme poverty. And everything I did, as I got out of poverty myself, started building companies, sold my last startup in 2012. It was all, a lot of people talk about the journey, right? And I'll be honest, for me, it was the destination. It's like, I need to get to a point in life where I can afford to end extreme poverty. And so that's kind of, all my ventures and everything. I loved what I did. I built and sold companies, did a lot of good work for big companies, all in systems. But it was always this goal I had, is someday, if Lord willing, I'll be able to start working on ending extreme poverty.
Love it. I love that. All right. So one final question before we start talking about BanQu, that exit, big exit. I think if I read your bio correct, you sold that last venture that you led to a really large global company. That was, of course, I can only imagine what I would do on a day like that, where you're celebrating the good news and the culmination of all this hard work. But what's one thing that sticks out from that day when you made that, when you closed the deal? What'd you do? What'd you do to celebrate?
Honestly, I think, I don't know if I did anything to celebrate other than it was this deep sigh of relief that I said, I can really now start 2.0, which is what I'd worked for all my life.
Love that. Now, with that backdrop, now you're
look at his face change. Yeah. You see, now he doesn't want to talk about himself. He wants to talk about what it is that's his true passion.
I love it. Well, as a fellow founder, there's a lot that I'd love to ask you about, and we'll say that offline, because I think there's a lot of that entrepreneurial spirit that's core to who you are. That's part of the passion. It's part of the drive. It's part of the purpose that makes up who you are. And I think that is absolutely fascinating as I look at entrepreneurs and hear what makes them tick. So Jenny, I don't know if that stands out for you as well, but it's intriguing. So let's talk about BanQu. So first, let's talk about that story. You referenced it a moment ago, but you didn't give the whole thing. So tell us about what's behind the name for BanQu.
So, when I sold that last startup in 2012, I wanted to do something, but I didn't want to give away money and start a philanthropy, because I'm a big believer that pity is actually bad, and in my opinion, right? And pity degrades somebody's dignity, right? If you're poor, I don't care. I need to treat you one-on-one as a human being and with the same dignity and respect. So I was just looking for things, and I became the volunteer CEO for a USAID program. And I landed in the Congo, in the DRC, first time in Africa, first country in Africa, and I was in the DRC. And it completely devastated me, just being very honest here. I had this giant ego, and I still have, everybody has an ego, but I had this massive head that said, oh, I can go cure poverty because, I just sold my startup, blah, blah, blah. And I was so wrong, because what I saw in the DRC was something that I could not have imagined actually existed. You read about children dying in the streets and cholera camps. I mean, you're from Africa now, in the DRC is it's the heart of darkness, as they call it, right? So I started working with local farmers, who were growing barley crops and, potatoes and stuff like that. And I was, a volunteer CEO running a USAID social enterprise. And at the end of 2014, we had gotten a lot of awards and everything, right? So it didn't help there in terms of ego. But what had happened in those 2 years, it kind of dismantled my thinking around equality, it dismantled my thinking around fair trade. Because what was interesting is we were buying crops like potatoes, barley, coffee, and you were paying $12 for a latte that said fair trade Congo on it, which is, in my opinion, totally not true. A little controversial, but I speak my mind. I'm at a point in life where I can.
That's right.
And at the end of 2014, I got into a fight. And that kind of defines me today, which is, and this is exactly 20 years after my Boston banking incident, right? Which is that this mama farmer, women are smarter than men. We already know that. It's just a fact. And I tell people, if you disagree, jump off the call. But what was interesting is that this mother wanted to open a bank account because, she had seen 50 years of horror, but she was growing crops. So I thought it was brilliant. So we went with her to the local bank to open a bank account. And the bank said no. And I was, I grew up poor, so I'm the first one to get into a fight, right? Because it's just survival skills, right? And the argument unfolded because the guy said, I cannot bank her because she didn't have paperwork, bring her husband, bring her son. And I'm like, wait a minute, right? She is like your perfect supply chain vendor. She has harvest, she has seen horrors, she's surviving on $1.90 a day. I couldn't make it a minute on my own, right? But in places like this, things kind of can tend to potentially get violent. And the guy said, look, I can't bank her, but how about this? I'll bank you. That's where the name comes from. And it just punched me so hard that I just lost it. And I quit. The next day I quit. I said, I can't be this volunteer CEO, because deep down in my heart, we had failed that mother. Although we were getting awards and everything, we had failed that mother because there's a flaw in the global supply chain that hit me in the face that day, which is there are millions, if not a billion people who work so hard in our global supply chain, grow our coffee, they're mining our cobalt for our iPhones, or they're picking up your plastic and paper, and it all comes into the supply chain.
Right.
But that mother is invisible.
So I want to talk, that's a good question. Or a jump off point for this next question, because you mentioned in Boston when you could open that bank account, that was a big deal for you because I can't remember exactly how you put it, but basically that's the day you became visible and someone saw you. So a big day, but I can only imagine it's one thing to take to take rejection and to kind of have that moment where you feel invisible as part of your journey, but then it's got to be much worse to see someone else get rejected and declined and not get the opportunity that everyone should have. I mean, it's got to be worse when you see it happen to someone else sitting right there beside you.
Oh, absolutely. And it was, for me, it was just from a technology standpoint, a technical standpoint, I was, wait a minute, I've made money on other people's data all my life, right? At that point. And I said, this is the perfect CRM, customer relationship management customer. This is the perfect supply chain, right? Which means that there's no reason that this mother who has been growing harvest, that I'm paying $12 for a latte in New York,
right?
Forget the bankability, right? We'll get to that in a second. What's missing is she cannot prove her existence in this supply chain. And because she can't prove her existence in the supply chain, she does not have leverage. It's the easiest example I use, right? If I told you, Scott, walk across the street to a car dealership, right? But you can't prove what you do. You can't prove your education. And for sure, you cannot show your pay stubs for the last 6 months. How do you think they'll treat you?
Right. That's a system. System
And that's issue. The piece that just, I could not comprehend. I'm like, why? Because on the other end, I saw all these people claiming tip the farmer, right? Super traceable, transparent supply chain. But there's a key word that was missing. This supply chain may have been traceable and transparent, but it was not equitable.
Okay, so we're gonna. I want to dive in a little deeper to what BanQu does, but before I do, Jenny, based on what we've shared there, based on what Ashish has shared there, and based on your own personal experience when it comes to banking, that's something you hadn't shared with me earlier. When you moved to South Africa, what's really sticks out to that? I don't know. It's part injustice, but part system breakdown. It's like the worst of both worlds, right?
Yeah, and I think that in a country like South Africa, where we've got such disparity, it's what Ashish is doing is it comes home more, because you know that there are some people who you can pay by money wallet. There are some people who you can't, because they don't have the right kind of phone, and they're never going to have the right kind of phone. But everybody just assumes that technology works for everybody, and it doesn't. And I really like that thing about data democracy. I think that that's something that, you've got digital dexterity, you've got the data democracy, you've got all this in the digital divide. It's all here and it's all happening, and it affects every single one of us. But some of the population are thriving because of it, and others are constrained because of it. And I think that's the thing that I guess we're going to hear, that you're working to sort of level that out, so that those who don't and can't, myself, we live in an environment where we have a PO box for our postal address. You can't prove where you live with a PO box. So I can't prove to my bank where I live. And, I've got everything else I can prove, but I can't show them where I can live. So in the old days, without showing my marriage certificate, I wouldn't have been able to open a bank account. So it's across the board. And, as the daughter of a bank manager, this conversation is really very, very close to home on lots of levels.
Thank you for sharing.
And if I may just quickly add, right, there's a gender lens, right? And this is something that, and I'm very honest, it happened to me last week in Ecuador, right? Is that women farmers work extremely hard. Men probably do too, but why not pay the mama farmer who grew the harvest? Even though she doesn't have a smartphone, she has an SMS phone, right? And I think, what I'm trying to get to, and it's not about BanQu or me, it's about, if you are the mama farmer or you are the mama waste picker, it's your account, period. Yeah. There is no argument there. And we need to do that.
Yeah. Agreed. All right. So BanQu, let's get back to, let's level set. And as we were talking pre-show, I'm on the short end of the IQ stick amongst the three of us here. So let's put it in terms I can understand, and our audience that may not be, technologists, may not be blockchain experts. What does BanQu do?
Absolutely. So it is a great question, right? And what you'll hear from me is nothing about cryptocurrency, right? I have a very basic pedestrian definition of blockchain that matters to the mother. Right. But let me kind of take a step back, kind of define the problem, and then why blockchain, right?
Love it.
If you put yourself in that mother's shoes, and she is growing barley, and she sells barley from tier 0, so think about her as tier 0, and then she sells that barley to a cooperative that is a tier 1 or level 1, classic supply chain. And then they sell it to a transporter, and they sell it to an aggregator, and then it makes itself to a brewery. In that simple supply chain where the crop is being harvested and moving 5 streams up in a non-blockchain world, right? Let's just level set. When that mother sells the bag of barley, who has the proof of that sale? Everybody other than the mother, number one. So what the mother then is getting is three disadvantages. One, no proof that she sold the barley. No way to guarantee that the price was fair price. And number 3, because of the first 2, she can't sit with the bank and say, hey, I exist in this supply chain. I shouldn't pay 40% interest rate on $1 just because I'm poor and I cannot prove, right?
Right.
And traditional data systems are one-sided. I grew up, in traditional data systems. So we take other people's data, put it into a database, the underlying last 4 letters of the word database, BASE, and we own it, right? This is just plain English, right? No gobbledygook. You don't own your data. If I am your coffee company, I own your data.
Right.
End of story, right? Now, if you wanted to level the playing field, then the most fundamental thing you need to do is that mother should have an equal copy of the data, that she can prove that she sold barley without anybody questioning that, correct?
Yeah.
No
Sure.
technology here, right?
Right.
So that's where, when I quit my volunteer role in 2014, I spent a year looking for, and I make fun of Indians because I'm Indian, looking for another Indian who had an app. And I found a lot of apps for poor people. And this part is critical, right? Because this will then clarify the definition of blockchain. And every app I found was the same old, which is my 30 years of career, which is, great, you're poor, I have your data, and I'll monetize your data, but you are always at the mercy of my access to your data.
Right.
You don't, right? So that's when, after a year, I landed on blockchain. The cryptocurrency piece, I didn't care, honestly, right? That mother on the Congo-Zambia border needs the 40 kwacha, so the kid will have food tonight and not die. I'm not being, dramatic. It's just a fact. I saw that in Colombia last year. You need pesos so the kid can eat, plain and simple, no crypto there. That's when I realized that the traditional systems don't work because it's a data dictatorship, no matter how you look at it. But there's a fundamental definition of blockchain that I gravitated to, which is super plain English, which is if two or more people participate in a transaction, both parties rightfully get a copy of the transaction. It is vanilla, it's pedestrian, it is as plain as it gets. That's when it hit me, wait a minute, aha, if I use this blockchain, this is back in 2016, and the mother has an SMS phone, right? She does not have a smartphone. That's a key component. Why not use this thing called blockchain to give her own copy? And at the same time, that copy will exist in the supply chain, which means nobody can deny it.
Right.
Right? So, recap, simple definition, both parties get a copy of the same transaction. And what BanQu does is enables that in a way that when the mother comes and sells, here's my 40 kilos of barley at 16% moisture, and she sells it to the first buying center. We run a software as a service company, plain and simple, Salesforce.com, NetSuite, plain and simple. Runs in the cloud, but what's most important, it's all on blockchain in its basic definition. The mama on her SMS phone, no smartphone needed,
right,
in the local language, gets a confirmation of the price, the quality, the quantity. Two more things, I promise I'll stop. And it's in the local currency, and especially in Africa, if she's using mobile money, like M-Pesa,
right,
she gets the money directly on her SMS phone, right? So in a very simple recap, what BanQu does is we're a for-profit, for-purpose, simple software company, software as a service. And all we do is ensure traceability and transparency, but we make it equitable.
Yep.
So that the mother can say, I exist, and nobody can deny my right of my existence anymore.
So some of the key things that BanQu offers that I picked up there, Jenny, and I love to get your take too. So access to information, which is currency in the information age for sure. In the tech, BanQu meets those that need where they are with SMS technology versus 5G and what else. Local currency, which is really important, and then overall the visibility that the platform is powering across supply chain, whether it's visibility for the farmer or downstream, so to speak. And one last thing before Jenny, get your take on what you've heard. There might be some folks listening, maybe, that say, "Oh, information's power, yada yada yada. It's just a mantra." Let me tell you this. So I made, and y'all stick with me just for a second. It connects, I promise you. So I made an insurance claim last fall because we had a major problem with our roof. So the insurance company I was with at that time, because we made some changes, they sent out a inspector, and I brought this inspector into my home. He took pictures, measurements, the whole 9 yards, got on the roof, a wealth of data. Well, unbeknownst to me, he took that data, made his report to the insurance company, and I never got a copy. They refused to release it. So naturally, when they made their decision, their negative decision, I had nothing to challenge that decision with. And so when I'm hearing this story of what you're empowering these farmers, that's where my mind goes is, with data, that is so real power in this day and age that you can stand up for yourself and make a case, grow your business, challenge bad decisions, you name it. And without it, you've got nothing except, sadly and non-dramatically, a family that goes without. So, but Jenny, that's some of what I heard from as Ashish was explaining. What did you hear?
It's also security. It's that thing that from that initial transaction, the record is there, the record is logged. It's not on a scrappy piece of paper that's going to get lost, or worse still, is written in pencil, or is done with ink that's going to fade. It's actually there for everybody to see. And that responsibility of keeping that record is no longer the responsibility of the person who's actually got to do all the work as well and raise the family and. It's part of that business transaction it's safe, secure, and transparent. And it makes all the sense in the world. Agreed.
Well said, as always, Jenny. Okay, so let's talk about, I want to make sure we feel like we've gotten the full value prop for BanQu out there, but you've got, as you mentioned prior to us kicking off the recording, y'all have had you've had a ton of recent wins, semi-recent wins. I mean, y'all are on the move. So what's next for the company, Ashish?
So, for me, there is no next in the sense that I have a personal goal that I've committed to with our board, which is 100 million people on our platform out of extreme poverty and $100 million profitable software business. There is no next until I get to that. And, right now we are at about 2 million people on our platform, and we're $4 million in profitable revenue. So we're profitable and stuff like that. So I think for me, more than the next piece, because that's the journey I am on, right? Blinders on, we're going to do that. Yep. What's important is to really get companies and brands to recognize that they owe it to their supply chains downstream this equity while they're making all these sustainability claims. Is for me, the big thing next is to get people to recognize that independently, forget me as a company or anything, that people just need to recognize that.
I'm hoping that some of your thought leadership and some of what you're doing and some of your great work, things are turning. When I was in manufacturing and supplying metal parts of all things to automotive companies, we got hammered a lot, right? Because some of those companies we dealt with, they were the customer, and they let you know that every time, and they beat you up all the time. However, to your point, Ashish, responsibilities in the supply chain that is a two-way street, and it always should be, right? But oftentimes it hasn't felt that way. So I love how there's a lot of dynamics that are helping make it really truly become a real two-way street. And it seems like BanQu, from what I'm hearing, is a tailwind in those efforts to make it a global supply chain that works for everybody.
Especially with the sustainability and the accountability side of things, where I liked your comment about organizations being accountable if they go the sustainability route, because we know there are so many of the large organizations that are saying they do things in the most sustainable way, which they don't at all. But tracking and tracing the way in which it's done is what's going to make all the difference to everything that we buy, everything we consume. And, in this age of ever increasing conscious consumerism, I think that, to be able to talk about knowing and understanding who that very first person is, who sold that first coffee bean or barley or whatever, is people are going to want to know that in the future.
That's right. And you bring up the point that we've been talking about, giving information to farmers, right? And that portion of the supply chain. But what's beautiful about what we're all talking about, and what BanQu and other actors are doing, is it provides that critical, accurate information to the biggest part, I would argue, of the supply chain, which is the consumer that's making decisions based on what, the marketing, the sustainability marketing, Jenny, you're kind of talking to, that sometimes you can't take to the bank, no pun intended. Okay. So this is, this could be a 5-hour episode, Jenny and Ashish. It's really it touches on so
if I
many
can quickly
things.
add though,
Yeah,
what you can take to the bank is the profit with purpose, right? And I'm a big believer in that. There's a room for pure NGOs, government, business, but I think businesses have to take the responsibility, profit with purpose. I'll give you 2 quick examples, right? And it's not again about us, it's about Coca-Cola is a good one. And Jenny, this in South Africa, right? They started a rollout with us because of the EPR compliance, extended producer responsibility and things like that, right? But their head of sustainability, David Drew, was very clear. Look, I want to know how much material is in our supply chain for recycling, but I want to know who the waste picker is, right? And it's not either or, right? I want to drive more returnables. I want to drive more recycling material. They work with Petco, which is the industry organization. And this mama in a landfill outside of Johannesburg through an SMS can say, you know what, I exist, right? It's so fundamental and doesn't take away from the profitability of the brand. Or last week I was in Ecuador, one of the fastest growing beer brands there that's locally sourced. The consumer is going to love it when they see the QR code that says that's the mother and she got paid, right? It's not this fake, brochure, right? And that balance can be met, right?
And that balance is so important for it to be met. I mean, it kind of goes back to that two-way street that we're still aspiring to get to in reality for everybody, whether it's the small family farm or whether it's the larger, tier 2 suppliers, you name it. Okay. So Jenny, as much as I'm very begrudgingly going to move us right along, you're going to ask about one of our favorite questions to Ashish here now, right?
Yeah, so I've got to ask you, what eureka moments have you had? But I've already heard quite a lot. But
yes,
in the last 2 years, with the difficulties of the pandemic, et cetera, all around the world, what real have you had any? I'm sure, but you look like someone who has a eureka moment every day. But what real eureka moment can you share with us that not been brought about because of the pandemic, but because of the way in which we're all having to live and the excess poverty and challenges that are taking place in the world around us at the moment, and how we can alleviate.
I don't know if it's eureka moment, but there's kind of three things that have happened, right? Which I've learned from. So it's me learning more than this aha moment. And one was about 3 years ago when we added the farmers on the Zambia-Congo border. And when we did the initial rollout with these mama farmers, it was all cash-based, right? Even if it was SMS. And one day this mama came to me and said, I love what you're doing, but the rats still eat the money. And I was just like, man, I grew up in India. The rats only ate my pockets, right? But then she explained to me, it's the husband, the brother, and the son. And she said, if you deposit money on our SMS phone, it'll make it easier. What was interesting is that we took her feedback and we rolled out mobile money, right? Through M-Pesa, MTN, and Airtel. But here's the eureka moment for me, which I learned from. The very first transaction we did, right? And somebody took a film about it and I watch it once a week just to remind me how smart this woman is, which is she sells the crop, the transaction goes through and her SMS phone rings with the money on it and she starts laughing. And I'm thinking she's laughing at me because I'm stupid. People laugh at me and I've gotten used to it. But you know why she was laughing? Is she turned around, and this part is key, and paid for her school fees and her solar home system. Think about the intelligence of that mother to leverage that none of us had figured out, right? So that kind of, for me, was this aha moment saying, wait a minute, I'm a nobody in this equation, but she's figured it out, right? The leverage moment. And then the other two ones are kind of intersecting, which is, inventory has become just in case in the pandemic. And I think companies need to think about the just in case so that mother's harvest doesn't go bad in a pandemic, right? And then the third one, which is breaks my heart, and trying really hard to address it, and we are doing a lot of work there, is child labor. Mm-hmm. Child labor is just on the rampage. And again, this is public information, so I speak about it publicly. Yet companies like Cargill and Nestle will stand in front of the US Supreme Court and say, we don't have anything to do with child labor in Malawi public case because we don't know who the farmer is. And I'm like, come on, man. Right? And for me, that the pandemic has created more child labor. Pandemic has pushed 100 million more people into extreme poverty and gender inequity. So we got to fight harder.
Well, and that's an important point. We had Tim Nelson on with us last week, and by the time this publishes a couple weeks ago, he co-founded and leads Hope for Justice, which is a global nonprofit that his mission is eradicate slavery. And blew our mind that in 2021, according to their research and their boots on the ground and what they do, that to your point, Ashish, you said with child labor, well, slavery is also on the rise. It's growing in 2021. Absolutely. That is that blow. I can't believe I uttered those words. I mean, it's just it is a travesty. Does not do it justice. It is a humanity crisis, and supply chain leaders, as we've talked about, not only are they in a unique position to do something about it, right, with these newfound ways of getting true visibility, but they have a responsibility to do something about it. So,
and you can solve it, right? I mean, the quick thing I'll say, you can solve it. And again, we do it. We connect the school attendance system to blockchain. So if the child is not in class, where is the kid, right? Under data privacy guidelines and stuff like that. So a lot of people take things about child labor or forced labor, and then they'll do a study. I'm like, we're beyond studies, guys. That kid has to be in class. It's your brand's responsibility. If you're buying the cobalt that powers your smart device,
right?
You can't just open a school and claim victory.
Right. That's a good point. Great point. Jenny, you're gonna
I was just gonna add that this is where what you've created and your team, Scott, is just so incredibly important, because you continue to give a voice and you shine the light on, or the dark light, or the whatever, on these sorts of things that are not talked about in supply chain management. And I think that that's where collaborations with organizations like ours, like with you, Ashish, with everybody that you talk to, the wider the net is spread, the louder we can talk and the more people will hear us. And that these things, these terrible things that should never be existing, like slave labor, like child labor, they just shouldn't exist anymore. Right. And hopefully that being supply chain that touches every part of our lives,
bingo,
somebody will take note, and one person listening to this might make a difference. So thank you for what you do too, Scott.
Well, thank you, Jenny. It takes a village, and
exactly.
The world's gotten so much smaller here in the information age, and it allows the type of collaboration and truth seeking.
A pandemic positivity
is
being able. It's made our world more accessible because we've all adapted to online and embraced it.
Excellent point. Well, and it's our honor to power the platform and empower the dialogue and discussions. It's that's our mission here, Ashish, and we're certainly kindred spirits. I think all three of us in the critical missions that we're on. All right, so as much as I hate to start winding down this conversation, this is good stuff. This is my manna from heaven this week, Jenny and Ashish. This is good stuff. All right, so what? Let's talk about beyond. Gosh, we've covered so much ground, but what else, Ashish? Maybe as we start to wind down, what's one thing that you're got your finger on the pulse of across the spectrum of global business that you're tracking day in and day out right now that we haven't talked about?
So I'm tracking 3 commodities, just being very honest, right? Which is agriculture commodities, mining commodities, right? So basically anything in the agriculture and mining sector, and then anything related to plastic, PET. Here's why, and I don't have the exact numbers, but there's about 500 million to 700 million people who live in extreme poverty who are in those three sectors in the world today. Yet, you and I and everybody listening are consuming products that are made by these people. And so I keep a close watch on who are the companies, not to shame them or anything like that, but just say, if you're claiming sustainable goals, do not forget that mama farmer, do not forget that mama waste picker, or that kid that is being forced into mining.
Yeah, the mining, I think, mining, when you think about topics where there's going to be a lot more conversation and hopefully action around, I think of mining, I think of water. We were talking with some friends in the Western US yesterday about how it's amazing that what's going on in many places around the world from a drought standpoint. And it feels like we're going to get to a breaking point, and it's going to be a reckoning. And water doesn't seem to be, top of the conversations that folks are having, but nevertheless, I can appreciate those three. You said agricultural, mining, and then plastics and PET, which no shortage of challenges we have that lie ahead of us. Well, not even ahead of us. We're living it right now, right? So
it's live.
All right. So before I make sure folks know how to connect with you both, Jenny, what else? I mean, when in your purview, I know y'all have got a big conference in August, your annual conference coming up. Outside of some of the topics that Ashish has shared and some of those that we've talked through, what do you think is going to be a big part of the conversations during the conference?
Risk, supply chain risk, and we've seen that like never before this week or last week in South Africa. With the horrific activities of violence that have gone on, and the looting and warehouses being destroyed, schools being destroyed, etc. How did anybody plan for that? And that's definitely all around the world. There have been all sorts of things that have gone on in the last 18 months that I know a lot of companies weren't prepared for. And how do we become more prepared for those? And how do we protect our supply chains against it? And one of the big missions that we're sort of, going out there, and one of the things that I want to be able to really give the biggest message from the conference is that we have to, as ordinary people, we have to learn to trust in supply chain management and in the people who manage them, because there's so much unnecessary panic and worry. And really that so from sustainability to risk to some basic best practices to all sorts of stuff, just because the event's online doesn't mean that we shouldn't still be educating, and education is not just found in textbooks. It's from people like you guys. So.
That's a t-shirtism, Jenny. And I wholeheartedly agree with you. And I appreciate you and the SAPICS organization and all the work you do so that folks can lean into those conversations and learn things that aren't in textbooks. 'Cause let's face it, some of those textbooks they age very fast. Even
pretty old.
They get published last year and they're already light years behind. But nonetheless, folks, make sure you can check out everything that event and what SAPICS does at sapics.org. And Jenny, how else would you suggest folks connect with you?
LinkedIn or Twitter. Jenny Froome. It's very easy to find me, Froome, not VROOME, which is what happens in most Dutch-speaking countries like South Africa used to be. So I went from being Froome, which I thought was a really easy name, to Vroom. So it's easy to find me. I'm quite active on LinkedIn and Twitter.
Yes, Jenny Froome, and we'll make sure those links are in the show notes. Really appreciate
as is SAPICS.
Yes, sapics.org too. Okay, so Ashish, same question for you. How can folks connect with you? And I tell you, we've said this about a handful of folks through the hundreds of episodes we've done here. I feel like, Jenny, we could attach some heavy duty electricity cables to Ashish and probably power some small smart cities around the world, right? So how can folks connect with you, Ashish?
Well, I think on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, it's just BanQu, BanQu.co, or Ashish, ASHISH, Gadnis, GADNIS, to any of the social media is just fine. But I think the biggest connection is with the two of you. So just super blessed. beyond blessed. Thank you.
Well, I love it. We'll jump on, talk shop and journey and mission and purpose with you any point in time. Again, I appreciate the kindred spirits here. Jenny, thanks for your facilitation. We're going to keep our eye on the BanQu story as it continues to unfold. 2 million folks part of the BanQu community. And I think I saw 45 countries. I could be wrong. Ashish, is that close?
48 now.
48. Hey, you added 3. Outstanding. I tell you, on the move. Big thanks to Ashish Gadnis, co-founder and CEO BanQu, for joining us here today. And of course, Jenny Froome, COO of Sapix. Big thanks to her continued leadership, facilitation, and friendship. Okay, folks, hopefully you enjoyed this conversation as much as we have. I tell you, I look forward to doing this in person at some point soon. We'll break bread and enjoy each other's company in person. We'll get there soon enough. But hey, if you enjoy conversations like this, be sure to find us at supplychainnow.com. Find us wherever you get your podcasts from. Subscribe so you don't miss a thing. But hey, most importantly, if you're listening, if you've made it this far, do good, give forward, be the change that's needed. Be just like Jenny and Ashish, and we'll all be in a better place. And we'll see you next time right here at Supply Chain Now. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for being a part of our Supply Chain Now community. Check out all of our programming at supplychainnow.com and make sure you subscribe to Supply Chain Now anywhere you listen to podcasts. And follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. See you next time on Supply Chain Now.